Greetings. I'm Pastor Dan, Senior Pastor at Hillside Wesleyan Church in Olean, New York. If you are a first-time listener and watcher of this, welcome. If you're from far away and just on the internet scumming around, glad you joined us. It'll be an interesting sermon topic today. If you are local, checking us out in that way, welcome. And if you decide this is a first step for you and you want to know more about Hillside, let us know, or just walk in the door Sunday morning and we'll help you that way too. But anyways, so if you think back in the day, at least back in my childhood days, before handheld technology, and you took a long road trip with your family, this was truly an experiment in restraint. Because a kid's hand, if held still long enough, will eventually find his way to his sibling, right? And then hands are flying, right? But first it's just the kid's hands, and then dad's hand has to reach back, right? And then he gets his hand in the midst of it. And you hear the dad utter those most famous words, "If you can't keep your hands to yourself, I'm going to stop the car." Well, it's kind of like our society is having to learn that lesson over and over again. We don't know how to keep our hands to ourselves. See, as human beings, we're both attracted to touch and we are both dispelled by touch. Do you remember the old ad by AT&T who once told us to reach out and touch somebody? I don't think they're going to be running that old ad anymore. Not these days. However, we could see a revival, say, of the old Police. Remember the group, the Police? And they had a song called Don't Stand So Close to Me. Right? In this era of COVID, I'm sure there are people wanting to sing that song. So anyways, welcome to our third and actual final week of our 3-week series, Touch, the most loaded word of our day. Now, I'd remind you here that I'm not here to spell everything out for you. I'm not that type of pastor. While I do have my opinions, and yes, some of them will kind of seep out more than maybe even I would like them to. Just be careful not to assume I'm trying to say certain things that maybe I'm not. That's all I would ask. What you can and can't touch in 2021 is something you have to navigate. In yourself and in this world, you have to make those decisions. And I realize this is a hotbed of the evil, contagious, and dangerous touch out there right now. I fully believe that. I'm just saying, if you can navigate yourself well, you can help individuals who are dying for positive, affirming, life-giving touch. So far, we have talked about a number of things with touch. Positives, negatives. We've talked about types of touch, including platonic, sexual, professional. We've done a quick overview of the Old Testament touch. But mostly, we've talked about Jesus and his use of touch. We talked about how Jesus touched the person who had leprosy and healed that guy. We talked about Jesus healing the centurion's servant by just pronouncing it. He not only didn't touch the centurion, he wasn't even in the vicinity of the centurion's servant. He just proclaimed it, and it was. We also talked about how Jesus touched a woman. Actually, the woman touched just his cloak last week. She had a menstruation problem, and she'd had a blood problem for 12 years, and she just touched his cloak, and she was healed. So we're going to talk more about Jesus' healing touch in a minute. But first, I want to talk about love languages. Now, in 1992, Gary Chapman wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages. And if you've been part of the church a while, I don't know how you would not know about this book, because every church, and somewhere in the next 10 years of that book being written, there was either a class or a sermon, or there was something about that book in your church. I read the book. Probably many of you did too. It had a lot of great things to say, really. Now, there are a few maybe negative implications, but overall, it was a good book. The idea was that we all have a certain way we most like to be loved. And we gravitate toward the most dominant ways. And he came up with 5 love languages, and they are receiving words of affirmation, spending quality time together, receiving platonic but loving physical touch, having someone do a kind thing for them, or what we call an act of service for them, or receiving a tangible gift from a person. Now, the mistake that most people make in all this, and I do this still constantly at home, is we tend to want to give in the way that we most like want to receive. So, as a person who likes someone doing an act of service for them, I tend to do that for like my wife or whatever, because I think, but it's not necessarily what she appreciates the most, and that's my mistake. This is a lesson we should all learn, especially in this kind of dangerous era of touch, because some people, that's their top love language, and they really need some physical touch. Other people don't really need it. It's low on the list for them, and maybe they're getting enough that to offer a hug is not really necessary for some people. So what I'm kind of encouraging everyone to do is find your small circle. Because now, while it's not everyone's top love language, most people at some point need a little physical touch. So if you have a family, that's of course the way you start with. You're all kind of going through the same thing, so you can kind of lean on each other with touch. You might have a close friend or two. I know males, we're a little more weird about this than most females. Maybe you might know a person who doesn't have a family, and you want to kind of bring them into your circle and say, you know what? Because most of us are not choosing to just be free with touch with everybody right now. We're being a little more cautious, and I understand that. So let's get back to Jesus making this complicated idea simple. So we left off last week with Jesus being asked by a synagogue leader to bring back to life his daughter who had recently died. So we go, Matthew 9, 18 and 19 says, while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, my daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live. And Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Now at this point last week, this is where the woman with the menstruation, the blood problem, interrupted Jesus, and then he dealt with her for a minute. But today we get to move on to this story with this leader's request. And it goes on to say, when Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, go away. This girl's not dead. She's but asleep. But they laughed at him. And after the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. And news of this spread throughout all the region. So apparently, the crowd didn't think the girl was just sleeping. And I would also believe they were doubting Jesus could do anything about her death. But the synagogue leader had some measure of faith in all this. Maybe the only person there, maybe even among the disciples even, that Jesus, only this person and Jesus knew that this could be changed. Now, what I find it interesting is the Mark version of this story says this. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Says, your daughter's dead, they said, so why bother the teacher anymore? But overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, hear this, don't be afraid, just believe. Okay, these are 5 big words for us today. And they should sting a little bit, because don't be afraid, just believe. If there are any words that we need to hear, and yet, we can misapply, we can misuse those words if we're not careful. And I want to explain that in a minute. Specifically, when it comes to the virus. Again, this is a difficult subject, my friends. But if we apply this too liberally, we end up putting God to a foolish test, don't we? Remember when Satan quoted scripture to Jesus? What did Jesus do? He quoted scripture back and he said, the scriptures also say, don't put God to a foolish test. Deuteronomy 6:16 he was quoting from. So what is a foolish test? Well, let me give you a crazy example. If I would drive my car 100 miles an hour to a brick and head towards a brick wall, and I would say, okay, God, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm just going to believe you're going to get me to the other side of that wall. I would say that's putting God to a foolish test. And certainly there are some things around this COVID that we would be guilty of putting God to a foolish test if we didn't use some common sense. Right? I believe that's true. So what can we expect from God in all this? Everything, nothing, something in between. It's difficult. Well, I don't know how you should or how you will apply all this series when you get home, especially with the most difficult part of this is the COVID part of it. The sexual other stuff and the touches beyond the COVID is difficult, but it's not extremely difficult. The COVID part makes this just mind explode because it's so hard to figure out. But I would say this. While the COVID is real and is dangerous, I believe there's another layer besides that real terrible virus, and that is the level of fear that we are experiencing in our society. Right? And I believe that voice is from the enemy. Now, there are all types of fear. I'm going to get to that in a minute. It's not just assume that it's just one group of people with one type of fear. See, God has called us to listen to his voice, and right now I don't know that we are listening. And my personal, private opinion, and I've been trying to listen on my phone almost every day to both CNN and Fox and the different varieties of opinions out there. I don't believe I think there's elements of truth, but I think there's a lot of fear-based news out there, and I think we better be careful. So that was an opinion. Another opinion I have is most of us, I think. So I'm going to describe a spectrum here. There are a group of us who are in the, well, I don't want to put God to a foolish test category. Therefore, everything is on us with this virus. Everything we have to do is if we do things smart, then we'll get our ways through. If we do things dumb, then we're going to just, life is going to be terrible for so many people. And we're in that camp where I don't want to put God to a foolish test. But if you go to an extreme with that, while not wanting to put God to a foolish test, which is a good thing, you can just not expect nothing from God. And if you expect nothing from God, guess what? Probably what you're going to get, nothing. Your faith doesn't allow for anything more. Okay, but the other extreme, there's a group of people that are saying, stop doubting and just believe. And that they think in the extreme case of that is that God's going to protect us from everything. That no disease, no persecution, no death. Well, guess what, Christians? Read the Bible. Guess that doesn't always hold true. Christians sometimes die. Sometimes they make foolish choices. Sometimes they put God to a foolish test. So you've got both groups of people here. And equal of them to the extreme are dangerous here. But it's just my opinion. It is my opinion, and the people that I encounter is that most of us are in the category where we're saying, well, I want to put God to a foolish test. Therefore, it's all on me. It's all on you and me. Therefore, we're going to take God out of the equation and not rely on him. Therefore, we don't really pay attention to the words, don't be afraid, just believe. So we think we have to manage this ourselves. That is my fear. We all have to figure out our fears in all this. I said before that I don't think there's just one fear. You think that I'm just trying to label one camp fearful? I'm not. There's fear in every camp along this whole virus thing. And I need your help with my fear. You know what my fear is? You know what my top fear is right now? And this is legitimately real. I'm fearing for our church. Maybe that's over dramatic. I'll explain a little bit why those fears are a little bit later in the sermon. And some of them come back to, well, ultimately, what does that mean for my family and what happens if things fall apart? So I need your help with my fear. This is not just pointing the fingers at your fear. I have fear too. I want to help you with yours. Now, some of you are just scared to death of this virus, and you're going to have to process if that's what God wants you to be. Okay, so let me tell you about one more healing of Jesus. So as Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." And when he'd gone indoors, the blind men came to him and he asked them, "Do you believe that I'm able to do this?" "Well, yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and he said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." I'm not saying this is true in every case, but in some cases, your belief in whether God can and could intervene will determine whether he does. In some cases, your belief that God could and might choose, or that God has the power to intervene, and if you don't believe it, then guess what? God is not going to do it, at least in some cases. Expect nothing from God and you'll probably get it. Is that where we're at in our society? Now, when Jesus touches lives, literally, figuratively, he usually does 3 things with it. He tests our faith. He might affirm the faith of the person. He might challenge the faith of the person to continually coming to him in greater ways, maybe. Jesus was a master, hear this, he was a master at being available to people without forcing himself on people. That's one of the things I think I've learned about reading the stories of Jesus. He was a master at this. And I think not only is this true spiritually, I think often it is true physically. Jesus opened himself up to physical touching the children, but he didn't force himself on them. Good rule of thumb. So I mentioned in the video part of the newsletter this week that we send out that I want to take an honest look at feelings and emotions, as well as my analytical part of my brain trying to figure all this out. Pray for me, I'm still trying to figure it out. The emotions and feelings come harder for me than the thinking part, though, really. So I'm trying to figure out, so here, we talked about this a little bit. What am I afraid of? What are you afraid of? Why am I afraid? What am I afraid about? What's going to happen if this fear comes to reality? Or maybe ask this question, am I being too cautious or too reckless right now in this world? Certainly there are some people that would point and say too cautious, and other people would point and say too reckless. Have I just become too complacent in the last year? I think we really have to look at it. I've watched more movies in this last year, and frankly, that's easier than doing some other things. So maybe the reason is complacency. And of course, a general feeling about your life. Are you happy? Are you depressed? Because if you're making decisions based on depressions, in a time of depression, it's not going to go well. So Pastor Nyla recently had me watch a video by a pastor, Craig Groeschel, and I'm so glad she did. He recorded this sermon that it was his first Sunday back after their church had gone out without meeting because of COVID. It was their Sunday. It was at least 6 months ago. And he addresses leaders, but also really addresses anyone with difficulties, which in our world today, which of course is everybody. And he says the first thing you must understand that in the world right now, it is full of puck. P-U-C. Acrostic stands for pain, uncertainty, and chaos. And you have to understand that there's a certain degree of puck. Be careful with that. He says that we must be careful not to over-control things. Because in the midst of all that puck, we want to control, but control is ultimately God's job, not ours. And it hits me as a dagger because I need to hear that. As a leader, we try to empower rather than control outcomes. Yeah, that's good. But then he came up with 6 principles that hit me, just wiped me out, and I am trying desperately to hold on to them. And we know what a principle is, right? It's different than a rule. Principle means it's true most of the time. there are exceptions. And yet wise people know when to follow the principle. Number one, no matter what you do, some people will be angry at you. Yeah, I'm having conversations with family members, frankly. Yeah, it's difficult. Some people are on a whole different page. Number two, and it stinks when that happens, doesn't it? Number two, the cost of inaction is usually greater than the cost of a mistake. That's really good for me to hear, because I'm one of those people that can really get caught up in trying to figure things out, and I get paralyzed. I get paralyzed with fear, and I don't make the decision, I don't take the leap of faith. Cost of inaction is usually greater than the cost of a mistake. Number three, if you make a mistake, and you will, try to make it in faith rather than fear. Try to make a mistake rather than I guess it's better to be more like Peter than not. Peter made a fool of himself many times, but he usually stepped out in faith. And so, make it in faith rather than fear. And the next three have to do with leadership. They kind of domino on each other. But again, we're all leaders in some way, at your job, at your home, in society, at the church. Number four, there is no pain like leadership pain. Wow, that was comforting. In a weird way, it was comforting. Number five, if you are not hurting, you are not leading. And number six, your capacity to lead towards the future is determined by your capacity to endure pain today. Did you get that? Your capacity to lead toward the future is determined by your capacity to endure pain today. Wow. We have too many people not wanting to lead today because they don't want to endure the pain. But guess what? God does not want you to stop growing. And He has bigger plans for you if we will just endure the pain of leadership today. So with these in mind, it won't surprise you that as a pastor, and as I have a bent towards making the mission of the church our priority right now. And of course, what do you mean by that, Pastor? I know. Does that mean we disregard all, I get it. I don't make decisions lightly. I don't make it unilaterally. That's why we have a board. In fact, our board's going to be meeting Tuesday. We'll be talking about safety issues. We'll be deciding about what we're going to be doing in this era of COVID surges, maybe, Pray for us at that meeting. But regardless of the regulations, we need to somehow figure our way through this church way through this. And my fear is, if we don't do it better than we did it the last 18 months, we're going to be in a bad spot at the end of this. Don't get me wrong, we've had some blessings this last year, and we've tried to give testimonies to people's freedom and our Waves of Freedom sessions and our healing journeys and so many different ways. There's been blessings, but man, we've had some losses. We've lost some families who actually left the church without really gaining only just maybe the McCrae Brook, as far as I remember, people. Attendance has gone down. Not even Sunday morning, as much as I'm saying, we're trying to have activities and nobody's coming. Summer's ending, so we'll see what happens. But my fear is we can't take another year like that. And even for those of you who are staying home, I'm fine with the reasons you're staying home, but we feel the loss. I'm not saying you should be here. I'm saying it's fine that you're not here because you have reasons not to be here. But I'm saying we still feel the loss. So today we're going to end here with at the church anyways, we're going to end with communion. I'm going to tell you about communion even though you're watching online because we're going to do it a little differently. Yes, we want to remember Christ's sacrifice. And we, at the Wesleyan Church, invite open communion. So if you want to have communion at home right now, I don't know what I need to do to bless your communion, but I am. We want to just recite the words before we eat this cracker today. We're going to say, don't be afraid, just believe. Yeah, we don't want to put God to a foolish test. Yeah, we got to be smart in our society right now. We're going to be getting ourselves in trouble because of our own ignorance and stupidity here. But yes, we still need to not be afraid and believe. And then I'm asking you to take the juice later today. As even in church, we're not going to take the juice. In church, we're asking our people to go home, take the juice with them, and process what it means for you to do that in a new way right now. To stop fearing, and stop your unbelief, and live. Live smartly. Live safely as much as you can, but have faith. And then once you've done that, then take communion yourself and finish the element. God's blessing upon you, my friends. These are difficult subjects for difficult days. I hope you will grant grace to me a little bit where you think I'm a little bit off. But we love you and we care about you, and we want the church to be united through all of this as much as we can be. We'll see you soon. Bye.